I'll hand it over to you, Amy. Really excited to hear what you have to say and what guidance you have for the rest of us in this area.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Really glad to be here with all of you today. I just quick wanted to kind of, let you into how I chose incident response. October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so incident response fits perfectly in there and really kind of just, rounds out how we react to cybersecurity. Secondly, I saw a stat the other day that there is a cyber attack every 39 seconds. And that just was astounding to me. I knew it was frequent, but if we did the math, which I'm not going to do because I don't have a ton of time and it would take me a long time because I'm not a math person. But if we did that math and just thought about how many cyber events happened while we were together this morning, I think that number would scare us, and we're not about scaring today. So we're going to move past that one. But then lastly, this idea of a tabletop test really feels Halloween-like to me. So we're really determining what we're going to do when somebody tricks us because they're not allowed to get our treats. And so I thought about that this morning and thought that was kind of fun and quippy. So jumping into the guidance right away, our incident response program, as stated in the FFIEC guidance, needs to have 5 different parts to it. We need to have a declaration, containment, response, restoration, and preserving our the different parts of the information that we found. Our incident response plan is just the documented, comprehensive, coordinated, integrated, actual physical piece of paper that sits behind that. And so the program is going to be everything from the people to the paper to the technology. The plan is really just that paper. The guidance mentions a SIRT, an SIRT, which is your security incident response team. And I'll touch on that in just a little bit, but that's really going to be those people who are responsible for keeping your plan and program up to date and then enacting your plan and program. And then lastly, the guidance really wants you to validate your plan. And so there's scenario planning and tabletop testing, which we're going to focus on and spend a little time on together this afternoon as well. Or this morning. I won't go into the afternoon, I promise. My goodness. Okay, so the first step in our incident response program is to declare an incident. And how do we do that effectively and efficiently? We want to make sure that we've got thresholds for reporting so that we know when a significant event is happening or when we need to be concerned. We don't want to guess. We don't want to wait for that ransomware message to pop up on someone's screen. We want thresholds in our environment and different monitoring and alerting to let us know when that's happening. Once we know something's happening, how do we let others know? Do we have Jim stand up and yell on his desk, or do we send out a text message? Do we have tools for alerting people automatically, or do we need to do that in a manual fashion? And then we have these incident response roles or tasks that need to be assigned out in the declaration process. And so we want to make sure we've got people who are responsible for coordinating the response efforts. We need to make sure that we've got people who are responsible for contacting the necessary people. And we want to make sure that we've got people responsible to, actually get in and mitigate and attack and be on the defensive to make sure that we are protected as we move forward. So we need to make sure we're assigning out those roles. Containment is really our most important step in this process at the time of an event. And so we want to make sure that we are containing what's happening, we're stopping what's happening. The first decision we need to make there is the decision between confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I have a note here that says, make this decision ahead of time. And I'll go back to this statement a couple times. These decisions are really important if we can make them ahead of time, or if we can have a decision matrix on how we would make the decisions ahead of time. We're going to increase efficiency in our response, and we're really going to eliminate some confusion for people. Incident response is really scary. Much like BCP or DR, we're talking about really horrible events that might not just impact our systems, but impact people as well. And we want to make sure that we are allowing people to work off of really well documented processes and procedures. Some of that will be either making decisions for people ahead of time or walking them through a decision process in a documented fashion. confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we need to determine what's the most important or what's impacted in this incident. It may be a DDoS attack, and so we're not concerned so much about the confidentiality of our data, but no one can get to their online banking, versus a ransomware attack where all of a sudden all of our data is encrypted and potentially stolen, but online banking's still up and running. So we have to make that determination ahead of time and determine how we're going to fix it and what we're most concerned about in the moment. We always want to document what we're doing as we're working through our plan. Documentation will help us with lessons learned. It will help us with any forensic evidence we need to do and any communication that needs to happen, any investigation by law enforcement that needs to happen. Isolation of compromised systems or enhanced monitoring, that speaks for itself. On the technical side, we need to make sure that we have gotten the bad guys out, or if we can't, if there's a reason we can't stop them, that we know what they're doing and we're watching them and we're able to keep track of everything that's happening. Searching for additional compromised systems is really twofold. So that happens here. We want to make sure that nothing else has been actively compromised. We're going to come back to that again in the forensic investigation. So part of that forensic investigation post-incident will be to determine that nothing else has been compromised. And then as we're going through all of this, the collection of that evidence is super important. We want to make sure we've got that in one place where we can reference it after the fact, or where we can get to it and make sure everybody's saving to the exact same location. That'll be really important. Next up on our list of different items is response. And so we need to have documented notification protocols. As most of us know, the laws around who we need to contact, when we need to contact them, what we need to tell them, those are constantly changing. We're going to need to, in the case of an incident, most likely notify the regulators, potentially customers, most likely our employees. The board of directors will need to know. Local law enforcement might need to know. Federal law enforcement might need to know. And we'll probably want to do some information sharing with FS-ISAC and companies like that. And so again, if we can go back to having that all documented out ahead of time, maybe even have templates for the communication where we can just pop in the specifics of the event, we're going to save time and we're going to eliminate some of that confusion. So when and under what circumstances do these specific governing bodies or different types of recipients need to be notified? What are the names and their contact information? We'll save time not having to search. We won't be confused about who should get this. We have that all documented out ahead of time. And then what information do they need to have at their disposal once we are telling them that this incident has happened? In some cases, it might not need to be more than just, we had an incident. But if, maybe employees' payroll was hacked, we're going to want to give them some more information than that. So to make that determination ahead of time will be really helpful. This "are there victims" bullet point just kind of plays into that. Who are we notifying? In some cases, there won't be victims that are outside of just systems, and then we don't need to do additional notification. But if it's our customers or our customers' customers that are the victims here, we'll want to make sure that we've got proper notification, and we also want to make sure that we've got recovery or remediation efforts for them. Just for, an example, credit monitoring, if it were to happen to our customers' data that was lost or stolen. We'll want to identify who's responsible for communication, somebody to be in charge of coordinating all those different efforts. They may not be the person doing all of the communication, but they're coordinating and making sure that the proper communication gets out to the proper people in the proper amount of time. And one last little bit here that I like to have now in the day and age of social media and how fast news is breaking and getting out is a script for our employees who we know we might need to let people know on social media that something is happening. Can we script something for our employees at the bank to just read if there's any questions that come in, so that they're not feeling put on the spot or forced to answer questions that they don't have the answers to? And maybe there's information we don't want out yet in the public, but our employees need to know for their ability to function. Let's maybe script something for those employees to respond. So next up, we're going to go to restore. And this is really once we've gotten everything contained and everything under control. We need to know if we're going to put in new systems or if we're going to put those compromised systems back into the network. And so if we are going to put those back, what criteria must be met beforehand? And, are they clean? Are they ready to go? Have we eliminated the intruder's means of access? And are we sure that all of our systems and data are in a good state? And have we put in proper monitoring to make sure that either A, this doesn't happen again, or B, it's not still actively happening? Our last step here is preserve. And this is where we want to make sure we're keeping track of all of that evidence. We've kept systems to a point where we could review them and look back to see maybe how somebody got in, what they touched, what they did. And we can really start to learn from the intrusion and make our systems stronger and better so that it doesn't happen again. In some cases, in the banking world, we may need to file a SAR for the events that happened. And so we'll need to do some research and maybe have some documentation in our incident response plan just on when that would be appropriate and when it wouldn't be. One of the most important pieces that as we move forward here is going to be the testing of our incident response plan. We want to make sure that the testing has these key factors: the scope. Why are we testing? What are we testing for? The entire plan, a very specific part, maybe just the communication part, but our test needs to have a very specific scope identified ahead of time. We want to make sure that the people participating in our test are the appropriate people that can truly test the incident response plan. It may not always be the people who would be involved in an incident response, but the right people to test the plan. We need to make sure that we've notified the people who need to know we're testing. Maybe we don't want to let the engineers know that we're testing so they can be surprised and we can see how they actually respond. But we want to let the CEO know so that if he starts to see some alerts, he understands that we're in a test situation. We do not want to, in any way, shape, or form, make any negative effect on the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of our current systems and data. So our test needs to be either in a test environment or purely a tabletop scenario where we're just talking through and not impacting live systems. And then the frequency of testing annually is what the auditors and examiners are really looking for, is that you have an annual test of your plan. But you may want to test pieces of it or do smaller tabletop tests if you make large network changes, large vendor changes, or if you've got staff, if you've got a big turnover in staff, we may want to run through a tabletop test, before our annual test, just to get them up to speed in the event we would have to enact the incident response plan. You're probably asking, how can we test? Great question. We've got options. A self-assessment is really helpful because you can do it quickly. You don't have to involve a lot of people, and it's typically not very expensive. And it will provide us good insight into our system. We know our systems better than anybody, so we know how to respond. One downfall of that is we know our systems better than anybody, so we think we always know how it's going to respond, and there's not usually somebody in a self-assessment who's challenging that, which is where this internal or third-party led test comes into play. We have an auditor, an outside set of eyes, an outside third party come in. They walk us through an incident. They watch us respond. They have our incident response plan. They can find gaps in our response. They can find gaps in our plan. And they can also help us understand where our strengths really are and where the team can really come together. So those external sets of eyes are really helpful. And that's really where we're seeing people do that on an annual basis with those auditors. Penetration tests are looking more at the technical side of things. Where are our gaps from a technical perspective, and what are our business processes around notifications from a technical perspective? Vulnerability assessments, again, this is another piece of that technical side. So this is where we're looking for, where are the holes that could cause us to go into an incident. So vulnerability assessments are really important for that technical, being less reactive and getting things done ahead of time. Audits, this is where we're looking at less of the technical side, less of the people side, and more of the documentation side, making sure we've got a second set of eyes on that document. I think we've all been to the point where we've read something again and again and again, and we kind of just put in pieces that maybe aren't there. That's where the auditors come in really handy to review these plans. All of these different things really allow us to report on the deficiencies that there are with different pieces of the puzzle. So we may have deficiencies in staff, in documentation, or maybe on the technical side. And all these different ways of testing really allow us to get the information on all of those different deficiencies. And one thing I would really like to just remind everybody of is that you can never test these things too much. And so when we're going through these tests, the more and more practice you have, the more and more you do this, then the less, the more like your body takes over, your mind takes over when you're going through it, and it's a little less scary. And so there's no practice that's ever too much practice.